Hi, my name is Anam. I'm a research project manager, and my role is to think about the goals of the research project and how we're going to meet them over time. So I do a lot of planning, bring together the entire research team, and we think about how our research plan is actually going to work in practice in the real world with our participants. And overall, we just want to make sure we're doing a really good job of running the project as well as we can.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm the Data and Dissemination Manager on the project. And that means that for all the data that we get for our study, so all of the questionnaires from our participants, I oversee to make sure that that data is kept safe and confidential. And I'm also responsible for dissemination for the project. Now that just means getting our research findings out into the public domain. So that could be to pupils like yourselves, it could be to teachers or parents, or it could be even to politicians.
We're going to be talking to you about ethics in research and why they're important. Really, ethics are there to protect the participants and the researchers themselves from any risk of harm and just to keep everyone safe.
Absolutely right. And what's really important for us that when we're thinking about ethics with either human research or animal research, that we think about whether that research is ethical and what might be involved in that research. So we do that with something called an ethics committee. Now the ethics committee is there to help you and advise you as to whether the study that you want to conduct in the future is ethical or not. They'll look at your study and they might give you advice as to what you can change about your study to make it more ethical, and then you can come back, make those changes and then get your study approved by the committee.
Unfortunately, before ethics committees were established, there was some really unethical research that happened. For example, in 1932, 400 African American men were involved in a study without their permission. All of these individuals had an untreated disease, and the researchers were interested to see how that would play out over time. So even when treatment became available, it wasn't offered to that group of people. This is an example of really unethical research that would not go ahead today with the establishment of ethics committees.
Okay, obviously that study is completely unethical. We need to think about harm for our participants and whether the benefits of our study outweighs the harm that happens during the study. So the harm could be psychological or it could be physical, but we really need to think about whether there's good enough scientific reason to conduct that study.
So if you think about a medical researcher who wants to collect some blood samples from their participants, it's good to think about, is that risk of harm just as great as it would be in everyday life? So most people are likely to get a blood test at some point. So when you think about it in that way, the risk of harm to the participant is no different to what they might experience anyway.
So when designing a study such as the one where you're taking blood, you need to think about the purpose of the research. Obviously taking blood just in and of itself isn't particularly risky, but we don't want to do that unless we've got a good research purpose. So why don't you have a discussion amongst yourselves about a study and see whether you think that it would be ethical to conduct it. So let's take a study where we're going to take a blood sample to see what the colour of blood is. Do you think that a research study with that purpose would be deemed ethical? Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to have a discussion about this research study and you might have come to the conclusion that the study would be unethical. And that would be for a couple of reasons. Firstly, although taking blood isn't particularly risky, we obviously want to make sure that it's for a good purpose. And finding out the colour of blood will not particularly help us treat any disorders or diseases. So it wouldn't be particularly beneficial to do that study. And furthermore, we already know what the colour of blood is. We've done sort of taking blood hundreds, thousands, millions of times. So we know that blood is red and there would be no real scientific benefit for conducting that research.
If, however, the aim of the study was to try and investigate the effects or the outcomes of a potentially life-saving drug, then you can see that the benefit to society is greater than that risk to the participant. There's a good ethical reason to conduct that piece of research.
And another thing we really need to think about when conducting ethical research is consent. We need to make sure that our participants understand why we're conducting the research that we're conducting, so they can give an informed choice as to whether they'd like to participate in the research.
Another really important part of consent is that the participant understands exactly what they would need to do to take part in your study. They need to understand what would be required of them completely, and you also need to explain to them what would happen to their data. So when I say data, I mean the information that they provide or any information that you hold about them. You need to make sure that it's kept confidential and it's anonymized, so no one outside of the research team should know who that participant is or have access to any of their information. Also, once the results of the study are written up, no one should be able to identify any of the participants who took part.
That's absolutely right. In our study that we're conducting, we have about 27,000 pupils that we go and visit, and we make sure that they're given an information sheet so they know the full purpose of what we're going to be asking them to do. And they also know that it's their choice as to whether they take part in the study. We can't, what we'd say, coerce them in any way. So we can't say to them, you have to take part in this study because it's really interesting for us. They have to just be able to make their own free choice as to whether they'd like to take part. And they must also be able to stop the study at any time and leave the study. And they don't have to give us a reason as to why they'd like to do that.
It's also really important that once you've given all of that information to the participant, that they have enough time to think about whether they would actually like to take part or not. So once you've given them that information sheet or any other information that they need, and once they've had some time to think about and make their own decision about whether they would like to take part or not, the next step is to take a written record of their consent. So you would normally call this a written consent form, and you just record whether they would like to take part or not. And you have some examples in your workbook that you can refer to. Now, the last step is if you're thinking about doing some primary data collection of your own, so if you're looking to recruit your own participants and to do some data collection directly with them yourself, you do need to check with your teacher that your plan is an ethical plan for your study. And if that isn't agreed with your teacher, then you need to go back, have a think about your study, how to make it ethical, and once that is agreed with your teacher, you can go ahead.
That's absolutely right. And if you'd like some more information on this, you can go to the British Psychological Society website and look at their Code of Ethics. And you'll be able to find out about more ethical issues such as privacy, confidentiality and debriefing.